Hello again. In this video, we are going to hook up some functionality for our start button. So when we click the start button, it loads to the next scene. Not much to see at the moment, but that is loading from one scene to the next. So we'll be writing the script and setting up our method to be able to do that. Let's jump in and get started. Okay, we have three scenes in our game at the moment. We have our start menu, our core game scene, and our win screen. And we want the player, when they click the start button, to load core game. When they click the that's it button or success button or you got it correct button, whatever you'd like to label it as, then we go to the win screen. And then when you click play again, we return back to the start menu. So we have a cyclical flow here from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5, 6, 7, whatever we get to, and then back to the start. And each of these scenes needs to have a build index. So we start off at 0 and then 1 and 2. We could load by saying, let's just load scene index number 1. And we happen to know that that means we're loading the core game. We could say load scene index number 2, but that becomes a problem if, and I'm going to get my pen here, if we were, for example, to add an extra scene in here, it might be between our core game and our play again screen, our win screen. Wind screen is the sort of thing you have in the front of your car, isn't it? Anyway, we might insert another scene in here that for whatever reason, because we think it'd be neat, and then we want to have that indexed as 2, so we can still keep it in order, go from core game to whatever our neat new thing is into win screen. This would then need to be number 3. So if we've gone ahead and said hard-coded or typed straight in, let's load 2. Now, 2, we have to remember, has changed from this to this. So there's all this kind of manual work, which is not a good way to set things up. So what we want to do instead is to say, we'll find out what scene are we currently on. So what are we on at the moment? What's the scene number? And then when we wish to add from, or when we wish to load from one scene to the next, we say, take whatever I am at the moment, for example, 0, and just add 1. And then when I'm on this scene, take whatever we are at the moment and add 1. So we would go from 1 and we would add 1 and we'd say it's now 2. So the add 1 allows us to progress along our chain when we're loading. And we'll have a different challenge when we want to load back to the very start, but we'll get to that challenge in an upcoming video. For now, we want to go through this mechanism of saying, what scene am I on? And how do I +1 to load the new scene? That is our loading mechanism. And I know those of you who have been itching to write more code will be excited because we're about to write some more code. First thing we will do in our hierarchy is create a new game object. So right click, create empty. That's a way of saying create empty game object, or we could come up to game object and create empty. We'll rename this and we will call it scene loader. This will be our scene loader game object. It doesn't look like anything and it doesn't have any it doesn't have any components. We're just going to use this as a container that will allow us to load the next scene. As is good practice, I'm going to right click and reset my transform just so it's in the middle of our game. Just one of those things we get into the habit of doing at this point. Okay, so now that we have our scene loader game object, our container, we're going to add a script. So click add component. We'll call this scene. I don't know why but was that. I think that was because I was typing in button. A funny thing to have halfway complete, wasn't it? Anywho, so we're going to call this. So whatever we type in here is what our script will be called. We'll call it scene. What should we call it? Scene loader. Yeah, scene loader as well. So it'll be a scene loader script. And of course, we have no spaces and we have capital S and capital L. Scene loader. It's the same name as our game object, which is okay. They're two totally separate entities. This is our script. That's our game object. Scene loader, hit enter and create and add. That will create our new script, and that has attached it as a component to our scene loader game object. Now, scene loader script doesn't have anything in it at the moment. Let's go find it. It will be in our assets directory. While we're here, I'm going to right click, create folder, and call this script. We don't need to add folders all the time like this, but good habit to get into. We're trying to create habits in ourselves here, so it's easier later on. And you can see that we have our scripts folder if it lets me double click. Okay, and our scene loader.cs, double check. Yep, scene loader is the class name. So let's double click on that to open up Visual Studio. And we can see that we've got our scene loader class right here. Great, we're not going to need our start method or our update method, so I'm going to delete both of those, giving ourselves a little bit of space. Okay, because we're doing scene loading, I need to use the namespace of scene management. So we'll type up the very top of our script here under using Unity Engine, we'll type using Unity Engine dot scene management, semicolon. That means we can now use the namespace of scene management and all that is contained within. We're going to create a public method called load next scene. Now, if you know how to do that, if you know how to create a public method called load next scene with no return type, then pause the video and type that in now. I'll give you a moment to do that. And generally, I want to give you a few little micro challenges in this lecture. There won't be a big main challenge. Just if you know what I'm talking about, see if you can type it before I type it, or type it at the same time without just waiting for me to type it. So public method, it's a public method, no return type, so void, and we're calling it load next scene. Capital L, N, and S. And then parentheses at the end. We need our curly brackets, our curly braces. Great. Now in here, we need a way of saying, what is our current scene index? And we want to define a variable, we want to declare a variable that is getting the scene index. So what we'll say is int, to say this is an integer, because our scene index is going to be 1 or 2 or 3 or 4, and those are integers. So it's an integer type, and we'll call it current scene index. What is current scene index? Well, this is a little bit hairy, what we're going to type here, but bear with me. First of all, we're going to start off with our scene manager class, scene manager dot. Within here, we've got a whole bunch of options within this class that we can use. We're trying to get the scene. We want to know what scene we are on. So we want to get the active scene, and can either click on get active scene, or we'll type it, get active scene. As soon as you can see it auto completes, you can hit tab or enter to auto complete. Dot. Now, what are our options here? So within our class of scene manager, we have our method we can use, get active scene, and within get active scene, what are our options in here? What are the parameters that we can dig into? Well, what we want to find, sorry, I forgot, here was a method, so we need our parentheses, my bad, forgot that, and then dot, we need to say, well, it's the very first option here, build index. So build index. Okay, and then semicolon. So what we've done here is we've declared and defined an integer variable called current scene index, and it is within the scene manager class. We're saying run the method of get active scene. What's my current active scene? Well, there's some things that we can find out about the active scene. The thing that we want to know is the build index. What is the current build index of the scene that we are presently on for this instance? Okay, then we want to load our next scene, not the scene we're on, we're loading the next scene. So we will type in scene manager dot load scene, and in here we want to load the next scene, so the one we're on and the next one. So if you know how to do that, write in the little formula in here for loading the next scene. And if you're typing that in now, that's great. I'll give you a little bit of a hint. We want to know what is the scene, or we want to load the scene that is one more than our current scene. So to do that, we say current scene index plus 1. That will load whatever we're on. If we're on 0 at the moment, which we are because we're attaching this in our start menu, which we know is scene 0, then it is going to be 0 plus 1, which will take us to scene index number 1. Okay, let's save that. The important step that we need to do is go up to File, Build Settings, and you can see that we currently have no builds in our scene, or scenes in our build, I should say. Builds in our scene doesn't make sense. And what we can do is click on our Scenes folder, and then just drag in Start Menu, drag in Core Game, and drag in Windscreen. And while we're in here, we can reorder these by dragging them up and down. I want to make sure we're in the correct order. So Start, Core Game, Windscreen, 0, 1, and 2. Excellent. We don't need to click Build or Run for now. We're just setting up our scenes in the build, and that's automatically worked. We don't need to save this window either. So out of that, we've saved. Now, as a final step, we need to tell something to call that public method. So we've just created a public method that we can use outside of this class. That's what public means. It's outside of this class in here. We need to find a place to put load next scene, and we're going to do that. We're going to put it on our button, on our start button here. So on the start button itself, not on the start text, we don't need to do that, but on the start button itself, scroll down until you find this field in here that says on click. At the moment it should say list is empty. This is where we can put in our rules for what is going to happen when this button is clicked on. So if we click the little plus symbol, you can see we have none object. What we're going to do is grab our scene loader and drag that in, because that is the game object where we just put our script, which has the public method on it. Now, when we look at the pull down here, it says no function. We have scene loader, and from scene loader, which is the name of our script, we can find, what do we call it, load next scene. So we just created that public method. It's now in our list here. We click on load next scene. So just one more time on this, because people often get stuck on this step. We've dragged in our scene loader. Our scene loader has our scene loader script on it. Our scene loader script has within it our public method. So I'm just back on my start button here. So we've dragged in scene loader, and then within scene loader, we need to click on scene loader as an option down the bottom here and load next scene. Okay, so oops, just clicked off. So I did that a couple of times slowly because that's something that people get stuck on. And now when we click on our play button, give myself a little bit more room. My game's pretty tiny over on the side here. A little bit more room when I click start. It's going to load into our core game scene that has our success button on it. So we've loaded from our first to our second scene in our game. When I click out of play, it'll take me back to the start screen. So it remembers where we were when we're in the editor rather than where we got to when we played our game. Okay, so we'll wrap up the video there. This is a big tool to have in your arsenal, the ability to click a button and load a new scene. Very cool. In the next video, we'll hook up the other buttons. So great work, and I'll see you in the next lecture.